There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes something important. Respect isn't requested, it's required. And the fastest way to lose your power is to tolerate words that were never meant for a man who values himself. Today, I want you to understand one simple truth. A woman's words reveal her mindset, and your reaction reveals your standards. If you don't protect your self-respect, you will lose yourself piece by piece. Not because she's powerful, but because you stayed silent when you should have drawn a line. Respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Never tolerate language that diminishes your value as a man. But to truly understand this, you must first realize how easily disrespect can be disguised as emotion, honesty, or even just joking. Most men don't lose their self-worth in one moment. They lose it slowly through repeated exposure to phrases that chip away at their identity. When a woman says something hurtful, dismissive, or degrading, many men absorb it silently, believing that staying calm makes them strong. But silence is not strength when it protects someone else's disrespect at the cost of your own dignity. Respect is not something you demand once. It's something you reinforce with every reaction, every boundary, every conversation. When you tolerate disrespectful language, you train a woman consciously or unconsciously that your emotions, needs, and standards are negotiable. Over time, you'll notice a pattern. The more you accept, the worse the treatment becomes. Not because she's evil, but because human nature gravitates toward what is allowed. People push limits until they're stopped, and relationships are no different. A man with self-respect doesn't explode, argue, or try to reclaim dominance. He simply does not accept language that undermines who he is. Respect is not about ego, it's about emotional safety. The moment a woman uses words that belittle you, guilt trip you, or dismiss your feelings, the relationship shifts from partnership to imbalance. A healthy relationship cannot survive an emotional hierarchy where one person's feelings matter and the others do not. In psychology, respect is closely tied to attachment patterns. Insecure or avoidant partners often use dismissive language to protect their ego. They may belittle your emotions because acknowledging them forces them to acknowledge their own flaws. When a woman says something like, "You're too sensitive," or "You should be lucky I'm with you," she's not expressing truth. She's expressing fear of losing control, fear of accountability, or fear of vulnerability. But just because her words come from insecurity does not mean you should tolerate them. Compassion should never replace boundaries. Self-worth is built internally but protected externally. It's your responsibility to guard what you've built. The moment you allow disrespect to slide, you invite more of it. Not every woman who uses harmful language is malicious. Many of them have grown up in environments where conflict was handled with sarcasm, avoidance, or emotional attacks. But as a man, it's not your job to fix her past or absorb her wounds. It's your job to protect your present. When you stop tolerating phrases that hurt you, something transformative happens. The relationship becomes more honest. She begins to understand that communication must be grounded in respect, not reaction. Women actually feel safer with men who have boundaries. A man who says, "I don't appreciate being spoken to like that," communicates strength without aggression. He shows emotional stability without being passive. And this balance is what creates true respect in return. A man who tolerates everything loses himself. A man who tolerates nothing becomes rigid and controlling. But a man who selectively refuses disrespect, regardless of how beautiful, emotional, or attached he is to the woman, sets the tone for a relationship built on equality. A woman who truly values you will adjust once she sees that her words have consequences. A woman who doesn't care will get angry when you draw boundaries. Either way, you win, because you learn who she truly is. Respect is not about being worshipped or treated like royalty. It's about being spoken to with basic human dignity. The moment you allow disrespectful phrases to live in your relationship, you create emotional debt that you will eventually pay for with resentment, withdrawal, and loss of attraction. Many relationships don't collapse because of cheating or conflict. They collapse because one partner stopped feeling valued. They collapse because small moments of disrespect accumulated until one day the man wakes up and no longer recognizes himself. So when I say respect is the foundation, I mean it literally. Without respect, love becomes conditional. Without respect, communication becomes toxic. Without respect, attraction dies. You cannot build intimacy on top of disrespect any more than you can build a home on sinking sand. When a woman speaks to you in a way that diminishes your worth, correct it, not to punish her, but to protect the relationship and yourself. A man who values himself becomes a man others value. A man who respects himself naturally receives respect, and a man who refuses to tolerate words that undermine his identity becomes emotionally unshakable. Because in the end, respect is not given. It's enforced. A woman's words reveal her emotional maturity. When she uses guilt or manipulation, she exposes her own insecurity, not your weakness. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in relationships because many men internalize a woman's emotional reactions as a reflection of their own shortcomings. When she becomes upset, uses guilt, or says something hurtful, a man often believes he caused it, that if he were better, calmer, more loving, or more patient, she wouldn't speak that way. But in psychology, a person's communication style is a direct mirror of their inner state, not yours. Her tone reflects her emotional control, her words reflect her emotional intelligence, and her manipulation, if she uses it, reflects her emotional wounds. When a woman uses guilt to get her way, phrases like, "If you cared, you would do this," or "I guess I'm not important to you," she is not expressing love, she is expressing insecurity. She fears not getting what she wants, or she fears losing emotional control, so she resorts to tactics that pressure you emotionally. But a mature woman communicates her needs clearly. She doesn't make you feel guilty for having boundaries, needs, or limits of your own. She understands that love cannot exist where guilt is the currency. Manipulation, whether intentional or subconscious, is a survival strategy for insecure individuals. Many women who manipulate don't even realize they are doing it. They've learned through childhood or past relationships that emotional pressure works. Maybe they learn that crying gets attention. Maybe they learn that withdrawing gets compliance. Maybe they learn that playing the victim brings sympathy. These are learned behaviors, not natural ones, and they reveal emotional immaturity rather than emotional depth. But many men misinterpret manipulation as passion. When she becomes dramatic or overwhelmed, they think she loves me so much. When she becomes possessive or controlling, they think she cares too deeply. This confusion leads men to tolerate behaviors that drain them psychologically. The truth is that real love is calm, steady, respectful. It communicates rather than manipulates. It invites understanding rather than demanding obedience. A woman's emotional maturity becomes most visible during conflict. If she listens, expresses herself respectfully, and takes accountability, she is emotionally secure. If she blames, shames, or escalates to manipulation, she is emotionally unstable. But her behavior, though directed at you, is not because of you. It's a reflection of her inner world. A woman who feels grounded speaks grounded. A woman who feels threatened speaks with manipulation. A woman who feels insecure attacks. And a woman who is self-aware chooses honesty over guilt. The mistake many men make is assuming that protecting her feelings is more important than protecting their own emotional well-being. They tolerate manipulation because they confuse it with love. They excuse guilt tripping because they hope it will bring peace. But it never does. The more you reward manipulation with compliance, the more manipulation you will receive. The more you give in to guilt, the more she will use guilt as a method of influence. You are not teaching her love. You are teaching her that unhealthy communication works. A man with emotional strength doesn't fight manipulation with anger. He responds with clarity. When she tries to guilt trip him, he doesn't collapse into apologizing. He calmly states his truth. When she becomes dramatic to gain control, he doesn't match her intensity. He stays stable. His consistency reveals something powerful. Manipulation only works on the emotionally reactive. When you become emotionally grounded, those tactics lose their power. Women respect men who remain steady, not men who become unstable in response to instability. Understanding this keynote doesn't mean demonizing women. It means recognizing patterns that often go unnoticed. Women who manipulate are not villains. They are often hurt, scared, or emotionally unregulated. But while you can empathize with her past, you cannot allow it to dictate your present. Your responsibility is not to heal her emotional patterns. Your responsibility is to maintain your emotional health. When a man sees manipulation for what it truly is, unresolved insecurity, he stops personalizing it. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" he asks, "What is she trying to avoid or control?" That shift in perspective transforms his emotional power. He stops reacting, he stops over-explaining, he stops tolerating what drains him. And in that shift, something incredible happens. Only mature women remain. Immature women leave because manipulation no longer works. Mature women stay because they value the stability you create. Ultimately, a woman's emotional maturity is revealed not by how she behaves when she is happy, but how she behaves when she is uncomfortable. She can handle discomfort without attacking, guilt-tripping, or manipulating. She is emotionally grown. If she cannot, she is still learning. And you must decide whether you want to be her partner or her emotional regulator. Your weakness is not exposed by her manipulation. Her insecurity is exposed by her need to use it. And once you understand this, you become a man who responds with strength, not guilt. A strong man sets boundaries not to control others, but to protect his peace, identity, and self-worth. Most men misunderstand boundaries because they've been taught since childhood that being a good man means being endlessly accommodating, endlessly patient, endlessly giving. And while kindness is valuable, the absence of boundaries turns kindness into self-destruction. When you don't set limits, people, intentionally or unintentionally, will take more than you can emotionally afford to give. Boundaries are not walls, they're instructions. They tell people how to love you, how to speak to you, and how to treat you. And the man who doesn't set them eventually breaks under the weight of his own silence. Boundaries are not acts of aggression, they are acts of self-respect. But society often punishes men for drawing lines. When a man says, "I don't like being spoken to that way," he's called sensitive. When he says, "I need space to think," he's called distant. When he says, "My priorities matter too," he's called selfish. These labels pressure men into tolerating behaviors that hurt them. Over time, they learn to suppress their needs to avoid conflict. But a relationship where you hide your truth to keep the peace is a relationship that slowly erodes your soul. There is nothing more attractive, stable, or grounded than a man who calmly enforces his limits. A man who speaks with clarity instead of fear. A man who doesn't become cold or aggressive when crossed, but simply decides what behavior he will and will not allow. Boundaries are not about power over her, they're about power over yourself. A powerful man is not the one who controls others. A powerful man is the one who controls his reactions, his standards, and his emotional space. In relationships, boundaries teach a woman something essential: how serious you are about your self-respect. When a man has no boundaries, a woman subconsciously loses respect for him. Not because she wants to dominate him, but because instability signals weakness. Women feel secure with men who have a strong internal compass. They feel unsafe with men who bend under emotional pressure. A boundary is not a threat, it's clarity. And clarity creates emotional safety. When you set a boundary, you are not demanding that she change. You are stating what you will do if the boundary is crossed. For example, saying, "Don't talk to me like that," is not a boundary, it's a request. But saying, "I won't continue this conversation if I'm spoken to disrespectfully," is a boundary. One tries to control her behavior, the other controls your response. See the difference? Boundaries respect her free will while protecting your dignity. A man without boundaries becomes a man who resents the very person he's trying to please. He starts feeling drained, unappreciated, and unimportant. Not because the woman is inherently bad, but because he never showed her where his emotional capacity ended. Men are often surprised when a woman keeps pushing or keeps demanding, but that is human nature. People test the edges of what they believe is allowed. The man without edges becomes the man others walk over unintentionally. Setting boundaries doesn't mean raising your voice. It doesn't mean emotionally withdrawing. It doesn't mean threatening to leave every time things get hard. Boundaries are strongest when they are calm, consistent, and delivered without anger. A boundary is a mirror. It shows the woman who you are, not reactive, not intimidated, simply grounded in what you believe you deserve. Women test boundaries not because they want to break you, but because they want to understand you. When she crosses a line and you do nothing, she learns that disrespect has no consequences. When she crosses a line and you explode, she learns that you are emotionally unstable. But when she crosses a line and you calmly hold your ground, she learns that you are the type of man who values himself, and that is the type of man she respects. Strong boundaries also filter the type of woman who stays in your life. The emotionally mature woman will appreciate your clarity. She will grow with you. She will adjust because she sees that your boundaries are not punishments, they are standards. The emotionally immature woman will accuse you of being controlling, selfish, or uncaring, not because you are, but because she is uncomfortable with accountability, and that discomfort exposes the truth about her emotional maturity. You will always lose yourself in relationships where you're afraid to speak up. You will always be drained in relationships where you allow everything just to keep her happy. And you will always be unfulfilled in relationships where love is traded for peacekeeping. Boundaries don't ruin relationships. Lack of boundaries does. A strong man doesn't set limits to restrict a woman's freedom. He sets limits to protect his inner world, to protect his mental health, to protect his self-worth. And when a man protects those things, everything in his life becomes stronger. His confidence, his relationships, his direction, and his purpose. Because a man who knows how to guard his peace becomes a man no one can easily break. Any phrase that attacks your masculinity or belittles your feelings is a sign of deeper disrespect that must be addressed immediately. Most men underestimate the damage such words create because they are conditioned to take it like a man, to stay silent, to appear strong even when something pierces them deeply. But strength is not silence. Strength is self-awareness. Strength is recognizing when a line has been crossed and refusing to let anyone, especially someone you love, speak to you in a way that diminishes your identity. When a woman says something like, "You're not man enough, grow up, stop acting weak," or anything that mocks your masculinity, she isn't expressing truth. She's expressing frustration, insecurity, or immaturity. These phrases are weapons. They are used to provoke, to gain control, or to trigger you into reacting emotionally. A woman who respects you will never weaponize your masculinity. She will challenge you lovingly, not tear you down. A woman who attacks your manhood is revealing more about her lack of emotional intelligence than anything about your character. In psychology, attacking someone's identity is considered a form of character assassination. It is the most damaging type of communication because it targets the core of who you are, not the behavior or the situation. Instead of saying, "I felt ignored when you didn't listen," she says, "You're such a child." Instead of saying, "I'm disappointed you didn't follow through," she says, "A real man would have done it." Notice the difference? One addresses the issue, the other attacks you. Many men become numb to these attacks over time because they normalize them. They say to themselves, "She didn't mean it," or "She was just upset." But emotional outbursts do not justify disrespect. Hurt does not justify cruelty. Anger does not justify humiliation. Every time a man allows a woman to talk to him in this way, his self-worth slowly erodes, and her respect for him erodes even faster. Because the truth is simple, you cannot love a man and belittle his identity at the same time. A woman who is emotionally immature uses attack phrases because she doesn't know how else to communicate her dissatisfaction. She confuses criticism with communication. She thinks the harsher she is, the more likely you are to change. But guilt, shame, and humiliation never produce growth. They produce distance, resentment, and emotional shutdown. A man who is constantly belittled will either withdraw or explode. Neither response helps the relationship survive. And here's a truth men rarely admit. When your masculinity is attacked, it doesn't just hurt your ego, it wounds your emotional foundation. Masculinity is not about being dominant or invulnerable. It is the internal structure that shapes how you act, how you lead, how you protect, and how you show up in the world. When someone attacks that core, it destabilizes your confidence and energy in every area of life. These emotional wounds often show up in your work, your motivation, your interactions, and even your posture. Words carry weight and disrespect weighs the heaviest. But remember this, a boundary that isn't enforced means nothing. It is not enough to say that you don't like certain phrases. You must show it. You must calmly and confidently respond in a way that teaches her you will not allow verbal attacks in your environment. Not by yelling, not by insulting her back, not by walking out dramatically, but by saying something firm and simple like, "I won't continue this conversation if you talk to me like that," and then following through. When a man enforces this calmly, a few things happen. First, she realizes that emotional attacks do not work on you. Second, she begins to see that you value yourself enough to set standards. Third, she starts respecting the boundaries you set because she knows you stand behind them. Women may test men, but they respect those who do not break under pressure. This keynote is not about controlling a woman's emotions. It's about teaching her the standards required to be in your emotional space. You are not telling her, don't ever get upset. You are telling her, you can express anything, but not by tearing me down. That distinction creates emotional safety. And emotional safety is what builds long-term stability in relationships. Some women will adjust when they see you really mean what you say. They will become more mindful, more respectful, and more responsible in how they express themselves. These are the women worth keeping. But some women will become angry when their disrespect no longer works. These are the women who thrive on emotional domination, not emotional connection. And that reaction tells you everything you need to know. You cannot build a healthy relationship with someone who attacks your identity. You cannot build trust with someone who uses your vulnerabilities against you. And you cannot build love where disrespect is normalized. A woman who truly values you will always push you to grow, but never by belittling your manhood. A strong man does not allow attacks on his masculinity because he understands that protecting his identity is not ego, it's responsibility. The more grounded you are in your worth, the less tolerance you have for anything that threatens it. And that is how you become unshakable, not because you are hard, but because you are whole. The right woman communicates, grows, and respects your boundaries. The wrong woman excuses behavior that harms the relationship. This keynote is powerful because it becomes a filter. A psychological lens that shows you who is truly aligned with you and who is simply aligned with their own comfort. Every relationship begins with chemistry, but only the right woman continues with character, and character is revealed not during the good moments, but during conflict, discomfort, and accountability. The way she reacts when you express your needs tells you more about her emotional maturity than anything she says when she's happy. A woman who communicates is a woman who values connection. She doesn't run from difficult conversations, nor does she attack you for expressing how you feel. She listens because she wants to understand you, not because she wants to win the argument. She knows that communication is not a battleground where one must be right and the other wrong. It is a bridge where two mature individuals meet in the middle. When a woman communicates with clarity and kindness, she creates emotional safety, a space where both of you can be vulnerable without fear of judgment or rejection. Growth is another sign of the right woman. Emotional growth means she recognizes her flaws without hiding behind excuses. She doesn't say, that's just how I am, or deal with it. Instead, she says, I see how that affected you. I'll work on it. Growth does not mean perfection. It means willingness. A woman who grows is a woman who values the relationship enough to become a better version of herself. She understands that love requires evolution. And no matter how strong the bond is, it will break if only one partner is willing to grow. Respecting your boundaries is the ultimate test. This is where the right and wrong woman separate instantly. A woman who respects your boundaries understands that your needs matter just as much as hers. She doesn't shame you when you express discomfort. She doesn't guilt trip you for needing space. She doesn't mock you for having standards. Instead, she sees boundaries as a sign of emotional strength, not emotional weakness. She appreciates that a man who sets boundaries is a man who has self-respect, and she values that. On the other hand, the wrong woman behaves differently. She excuses harmful patterns instead of correcting them. When you bring up something hurtful she says you're overreacting. When you express your needs, she says you're so demanding. When you ask for respect, she says you're too sensitive. These responses reveal someone who is unwilling to take responsibility for her actions. And a relationship with someone who avoids responsibility becomes a cycle of blame, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. The wrong woman uses excuses because excuses protect her comfort. Growth requires effort. Accountability requires honesty. Respect requires self-control. These are qualities that emotionally immature women struggle with. Instead, they blame external factors, you, stress, the situation, their past, anything except their own behavior. Over time, these excuses become patterns. Patterns become habits, and habits become emotional damage. A man who stays with a woman who excuses harmful behavior eventually loses his confidence. He starts questioning himself. He wonders if he's the problem. He begins shrinking to avoid conflict, walking on eggshells to keep the peace. This is how good men lose themselves, by giving their peace to the wrong woman. And once a man loses himself, the relationship becomes a prison instead of a partnership. But with the right woman, something entirely different happens. She helps you expand, not shrink. She helps you express, not suppress. She encourages your dreams, not distracts from them. She holds you accountable with love, not with shame. And when you both communicate honestly, the relationship becomes a source of strength instead of stress. The right woman sees your boundaries as a sign of emotional health. She trusts a man who knows his limits because such a man is reliable, grounded, and stable. Boundaries make relationships predictable in the best way. They create certainty. A relationship without boundaries becomes emotional chaos where reactions replace understanding and assumptions replace clarity. The wrong woman will always resist boundaries because boundaries expose her patterns. When she can no longer blame you, she must face herself. And facing herself is something she is not ready for. So she chooses excuses instead of accountability. That is the difference between emotional maturity and emotional avoidance. The right woman grows with you. The wrong woman drains you. The right woman respects your boundaries. The wrong woman tests them until they break. The right woman communicates to connect. The wrong woman communicates to control. These differences may seem subtle in the beginning, but over time, they create two completely different emotional realities. A relationship with the right woman becomes a partnership, not a battle. It becomes a place where two people choose each other every day through respect, effort, and honesty. And that is the kind of relationship every man deserves. Not one built on excuses, but one built on growth. Because the right woman doesn't just love you, she builds with you, she evolves